wrote that in an ideal world, the teacher would have precise and current knowledge of each student's starting points and also of what assistance each student requires to move to the next level. So again, underlining the importance of being clear about where the child is up to in his or her learning, and using that as assistance in identifying starting points for teaching. Now, sometimes to fully understand where a student's up to in his or her learning, it's important not just to give the regular classroom assessments, but to drill down, as I've said here, to go to investigate in more depth what the problem is, what the misunderstanding is, what the error is that the student is making, because it's only by understanding in that more detailed way that as a teacher I'll be able to take action to promote further learning. For example, if a child gave this answer in response to this question, one thing we could do is just mark it wrong and move on. But another thing we could do is to have a guess at what the student might misunderstand or what error they're making here. And we might actually test that out. Suppose, for example, that they gave this answer to the next question, to another question that we asked them. It's starting to suggest what they're doing. Yes? We might, just to get a further piece of evidence, ask them this question. And what would you predict they might answer to this? Right. 5/6, yep. So diagnostic testing will sometimes be required for individuals to drill down and to better understand. Sometimes we might have to become creative, innovative in the ways that we probe and try to understand students' understandings of concepts and ideas. We know, again, from research in science education, that students can finish high school physics, for example, with high marks, with the ability to solve problems, to recognise the formulae that they need to solve a problem, to plug numbers in, to get the right answer, and still not fully understand the underlying physics. So they can get the right answer, but have a misconception about the underlying physics. For example, the relationship between force and motion. One of my colleagues in Australia, Andrew Stefanu, developed this question, if you like, this activity. It says, a man holding a heavy ball runs at a constant velocity past a camera on a fixed tripod on the ground. Snapshot A shows the man releasing the ball, and then snapshot B shows the ball where it was released, and the man has run on, and students were asked, sketch as accurately as you can the path of the falling ball as seen by the photographer standing on the ground. It's not your traditional Year 12, end of high school physics question. What Andrew found was that among Year 12, end of high school, end of secondary school physics students, and even among some university physics students, there were different kinds of responses. Some students drew a path like this and said it's just the same as when you drop a ball out of a car or an object out of a car. It falls behind you. Others drew a path like this and said there's only one force acting on the ball. That's the force of gravity, so of course it will fall straight down. And other students drew a path like this and said the ball was already moving from left to right, so it will continue moving and it will fall under the influence of gravity. So the point I'm making here is to understand the misunderstandings that students have, to really dig down deeply and expose their misconceptions. We might have to, at times, develop quite creative forms of assessment. Assessments for improved teaching and learning would also provide a way for teachers, for students, for parents to monitor the progress that individuals are making over time, because there's no better way of helping a student see that they are learning and give them confidence about their ability to learn than to allow them to see the learning that's occurring. And often we hide that from them. or at least we don't go to the trouble of making it very clear to them. There are simple things that can be done, like keeping a sample of a child's writing from second grade and showing it to them in fourth grade so they can see the progress they've made. Lots of things can be done to allow students to see the progress. This is from some literacy or numeracy, in this case testing that we do in Australia across the whole country. It shows one child's results in Year 3, Year 5, Year 7 and Year 9 plotted against national norms in numeracy so that the teacher and the child and the parents perhaps can look at the progress the child is making over time. Fairly high measurement error around these points, and so there's a level of uncertainty about this, but at least it's giving some indication of where the child's up to. By assisting students to see the progress they're making, as I said, assessments of this kind would build self-confidence, and by making explicit the path along which students are progressing, by helping students understand that path, and a path that goes across the years of school in mathematics or in science or in language learning, we help students to not only see where they're currently up to in their learning, but also think about what comes next and what they might do to support further their own further learning. So just in summary, there's a great deal that we're learning about learning from various fields of research. As educators, I believe we need to be well aware of that. We need to keep across what we're learning about learning, because it very often does have implications for what we do in schools and what we do in classrooms. I think a lot of our assessment practice in the past, and this is true in Australia, it's true in every country, a lot of our assessment practice has not been very consistent with the understandings that we now have of learning. It hasn't always capitalised on what we are learning about learning. In particular, I believe that better methods of assessment could be developed for monitoring children's progress over time, for helping them to see that progress, for helping them to see what they can do next to support their further learning. Thank you very much.
We move on to the next session for the day. We would now like to invite on stage Professor Kapil Kapoor, former Pro Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Kapoor is an eminent scholar and a concurrent professor of Sanskrit studies and has several books to his credit. May we invite Dr. Sadhana Parashar, Head, Innovations and Research, CBSE, to welcome him. Professor Kapoor, ladies and gentlemen.
Australia and maybe other places also, and such a distinguished gathering of fellow teachers. I'm overwhelmed because, as you've just seen, I seem to have reached an age where I am meant to be decorated than listened to. So I've crossed 70, and I think it's in the fitness of things. But I am very touched because when I came in here and I saw this wonderful place, very awe-inspiring, very comfortable, so I was mentally expressing my sort of reservation about Dr. Sadhana Parashar. I was thinking of her as the culprit who brought me here. She was, I don't know whether she would like me to say that, she was my student many years ago. She did a research with me, and I am sure that she wanted to honor her teacher, and she has brought me here. Thank you very much. In a way, I am the wrong person for this assignment because I haven't done much organized thinking about assessing students. I've been teaching, I was teaching, I'm still teaching. I've been teaching for more than 50 years, and thousands of students have gone. I suppose I have assessed them all, one way or the other. And I'm sure some of them at least have learned something also. But I don't think at any point of time I thought much about method of assessing. I didn't really think in terms of controlling the student, controlling the activities. Didn't really do much manipulation of the student's learning process. And never felt that I was the master of the whole situation, which to my mind, a learning teaching situation is a participative situation, and the line of teacher and taught, there is no this kind of line. It's a very inexplicable process by which students learn. Maybe because, you see, I was listening very interestedly to a wonderful presentation, very well organized presentation before this. And Wordsworth's poem, Sam Willie, came to my mind. Why dost, Sam, thou sit on that stone and while your time away? So Sam Willie is a boy, he just sits on a stone all through the day, and then this teacher, quotes, comes and says, why are you wasting your time? There are books to read, there are old masters who want to communicate with you, you are wasting your time. And he said, Sam says, the eyes cannot but see, and the ears cannot but hear. He says that I am thinking, and nature is talking to me. The environment is talking to me. And in the process, the idea is he is learning so much. So, I think when we are talking of evaluating or assessing how much has been learned, how much has not been learned, what can be learned, what cannot be learned, what can be tested, what cannot be tested, I think we are talking, we have in our mind the possibilities of different kinds of knowledge. That is the object of learning or object of inquiry. Imbibing is a different word from learning. Imbibing, you imbibe. I think Sam Willie was imbibing. And a whole philosophy of education can differ from the empiricist, where you have the visual inputs, the sensory inputs, and there are so many things being shown to you. As a case that you are sitting with a teacher, you're just sitting with a teacher, casually, occasionally conversing with him, and in the process, perhaps learning things that cannot be learnt in any other way. It was said that in classical India, I don't like to use the word ancient, although that is a popular word, because the moment you say ancient, you sort of distance yourself. In Indian system of education, the students lived with the teacher. They lived with the teacher, and they learnt from watching the teacher, from listening to his occasional words. They imbibed his method of working, they imbibed his efficiency, they imbibed his the way his inner self organizes things, cognizes things, because the teacher was a walking library. You see, the Indian tradition, to my mind, still continues to be oral. It was oral. The teacher was a walking library, an encyclopedia of knowledge, and the student simply had to trail him all the while to get something from him. Because we do make a distinction between Gyan and Vijnana. You see, two kinds of knowledge. Knowledge which is sensory, through sensory inputs and observational and quantifiable, and knowledge which cannot be sensory, cannot be quantified. For example, you cannot really explicitly teach a student how a good teacher's mind works. You see, you can't teach that, how a good mind works. And therefore, these were some of the stray thoughts that came to my mind as I was listening to this. Another thing that I am thinking of is that this is a subject that I have taken. The subject I have taken is very different, or maybe I was told to address myself to this question: assessment in India's intellectual traditions. How assessment was done, if at all done, in the Indian system of education. Now, this different subject needs to be explained, because we are talking of contemporary education, modern in quotes, contemporary education, and the practices of learning and testing that are going on. Then in that context, how come that you talk about India's intellectual traditions, you talk about past, nissa, present, you talk about how knowledge formation took place, how knowledge storage took place, how knowledge dissemination took place, how knowledge transfer took place. So this needs to be explained. In our country, as perhaps in China to some extent, you see, we have an education system which is the product of our having been colonized for some time. So we have an education system which is the product of our colonial experience. I'm not going to go into all the history, this debate between the Anglicans and the Orientalists, how the Indians were arguing for Anglican education and Englishmen were arguing for Indian education. They're very strange experience. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to again mention Macaulay, who has been mentioned very many times and keeps being mentioned. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that although we are not very aware, there are competing education systems in our country. There are competing educational systems. Now, such competing educational systems have to be there, are likely to be there in cultures which have a long history and have a rich past. So China also has competing systems. Although the dominant system that we call the mainstream system, as for example here in India, the dominant system is so dominant and so pervasive, at least apparently, it hits you that we are not aware generally that there are other systems and that this system is maybe doing things which may not always necessarily be good. And what impact this mainstream system, this system, dominating system, is having on our life, on our thought patterns and other things. Notice that if you imagine, if you can go out from this beautiful hall 60-70 kilometers into the countryside, then the language I am using, the vocabulary I am using, the issues I am debating are not relevant. They are not relevant. You try going to a village where people don't know English, and you start trying to paraphrase your English vocabulary into the native, into the mother tongue, into the language of the people. Many times, you will not even find words for that. So you'll have difficulty in explaining what your problem is. I'll give you an example. In JNU, we were talking about multiculturalism and the problems of multiculturalism, plurality and all that. So I asked my younger professor friend, professor of Spanish, I said, suppose you go out with me to a village and we tell this thing, we share this problem with them. What will you say? What is your word for multiculturalism that you will use there? You will have to say, look, in our country, there are many different kinds of people speaking different languages, different religions, and the villager will say, yes, yes, of course, yes. Then he'll say, but don't you think it's a problem? The villager will say, what is the problem? We are all there. Yes, there are Muslims in our village. We speak Hindi. Many of the problems that we constitute in the vocabulary of the university, academy, vocabulary of the academy, are problems we construct. And then we spend a lot of time and energy and research projects trying to find solutions to them. So the moment we paraphrase, consider, my friends, consider the questions of alienation, existentialism. Try to paraphrase and go and talk to people, our identity. In fact, Indians suffer from over-identity because we live in a network of relationships. If somebody talks about me in my family, somebody will say he is uska chacha, uska mama, uska bhanja, uska nana, uska bhatija. I am so many things. So these problems sometimes we may be constructing. I want to draw your attention to the asymmetries and disjunctions. Asymmetries and disjunctions that this education, our education, has introduced in our life. A kind of a generalization, but I have often said that our young people who go out of the universities or schools, even CBSE, our young people who go out of this education, at best they are ignorant of themselves, at worst they have contempt for themselves. And secondly, a boy who goes out of this education, he thinks India lives in cities. Believe me. And he thinks that development means building cities. And that all development takes place in the cities. Right? And thirdly, he thinks that all knowledge has been created in the West. And all knowledge is stated in English language. You can try, because I experienced once, you see, there was this grammarian Panini in India. When I mention Indian names, sir, to our students, I feel I am mentioning foreigners' names. So I often ask, have you heard of Panini? Some bright young people will say, was he a cousin of Toscanini? To tell him no, he was a Punjabi and he was a